Hey there, Rednecks, Preppies, Redneck Preppies. It's me, the Redneck Preppy. How you doing today? Great? Good. I think it's fair to say that the Martini-Henry may be one of the most iconic rifles of the past 150 years. As soon as you mention its name, at least the gunnies, you immediately evoke images of desperate battles against Somali tribesmen, the stand at Rorke's Drift, India, basically anywhere in the world that the British Empire had a foothold in, the Martini-Henry was there. Now, while many people may be familiar with the events that the Martini-Henry participated in, fewer are probably familiar with the history of the rifle itself. That can be remedied, friends, with Neil Aspinshaw's The Martini-Henry for Queen and Empire, a 2019 book, which will give you a history of the Martini-Henry, martini-medford, and martini-enfield rifles, basically from 1869 to 1904. Now, today we're going to take a look at this book. We're going to go inside the pages, see what you get, and we'll figure out whether this is a worthy collection to your library. So not surprisingly, perhaps, that a history of the Martini-Henry rifle and its cousins would begin with a history of how that rifle actually came about. Now, Aspinshaw goes into quite a bit of detail chronicling what seemed to be an endless process to replace the Snider Enfield with a rifle from several contenders, the ultimate winner, of course, being the design by Friedrich von Martini. Of course, that's only the end of the beginning, because then you have to deal with the usual issues of taking a trials rifle and turning it into something that you could produce in volume to provide arms not only to the British military, but also its far-flung colonies like Canada and Australia. The Martini-Henry, of course, covers a number of different models that stretch from the Mark I rifle that came into service in 1871 to the Mark IV in 1888. Aspinshaw probably could have devoted a book to the process of selecting and developing the Mark I rifle alone. All sorts of, pretty colorful personalities were involved, many with their own rifles designs, others with their own ideas, and it seemed to jerk the process back and forth for years before enough people, and that wasn't unanimous, could get on the same page. Now, although we look at the Martini-Henry as an iconic rifle of fairly static design, reading this book really reveals that the rifle always seemed to be in a state of flux. As soon as a version was solidified, it seemed like they were intent on changing it again. Many don't know today, for example, that the Mark IV rifle wasn't originally intended to be chambered in the familiar 5.77-450 cartridge, but rather a .402 caliber cartridge. They actually started producing that rifle in that cartridge before switching course and rechambering in the older cartridge. Along with the Martini-Henry, as the title suggests, Aspinshaw also takes a look at its successors, including the Martini-Medford and the Martini-Enfield. The latter is really just a rebarreled Martini-Henry Mark III. Both of them chambered in the .303 British cartridge. Of course, no book would be complete without taking a survey of the accoutrements that come with a rifle. Aspinshaw devotes quite a bit of time looking at the 5.77-450 cartridge that the Martini-Henry rifle utilized, its history, its development, and he also looks into the issue of alleged jamming, which is something that the British authorities used as a cover story for the failure of British forces at Isan Luana in 1879. The book also covers bayonets, which were issued along with the rifle, of which there was a huge variety. Now, wouldn't you know it, not only was there a controversy surrounding the ammunition, there was also controversy involving the bayonets as well. So it kind of proves that when it comes to military procurement, the more things change, the more they actually stay the same. Now, something that I really appreciated that Aspinshaw did was take a look at the way that the Martini-Henry rifle was used by British forces in more than a few notable battles. For example, as I mentioned, there was a belief spread by the British authorities that the 5.77-450 cartridge caused jams in the rifle, which led to the loss at Isandlwana, something that Aspinshaw actually takes issue with, considering there was only one reported incident of a rifle jamming at Rorke's Drift only a few days later, and in a battle that actually took several times longer to fight. We also learn a little bit about the rifle's use in Afghanistan, Somalia, and the tactics that the British Army used during those wars. Unfortunately, Aspinshaw doesn't really get into the rifle's use by British colonies, other than to say it was fairly generally well regarded by all. As you can see by the pages of the book, it does not suffer for a lack of photographs and drawings, both black and white and in color. I can't really criticize any of them. They generally illustrate what they're supposed to, and clearly enough that you'll understand what they're trying to represent. I find that firearms photography can be a little bit difficult thing to pull off well, but this book does an excellent job, and both Aspinshaw's pictures and those provided to him are pretty good quality. Aspinshaw does end the book with a nice little sop to gun geeks. Things like markings that you'll find on the rifles, service, armory, unit markings, some of which could help in the tracing of your rifle if you happen to own one. And also a quick guide to the large array of Martini-Henry, martini-medford, and martini-enfields in all of their variants. Okay, so now that we've taken a look inside the book, allow me to pass judgment on Neil Aspinshaw's efforts. Now, before I get to the recommendation, 2 minor quibbles with the book. The first is the number of spelling and typo mistakes in it were actually a little surprising. I really think that the Martini-Henry for Queen and Empire could have used perhaps a little bit more of a rigorous editing. It's not a mark against the book's quality, because obviously the scholarship is there. The photographs are fantastic. Neil Aspinshaw obviously did a lot of work on this book. But if you are OCD about things like spelling and typos, like I am, be prepared for that. The second may be a bigger hurdle for some people, and that's the price that this book carries. It cost me about $150 Canadian to get this book. $50 of that was shipping. Now, although this was printed under the IMA imprint, it is essentially a self-published effort, and there's probably a low volume of copies. So with those 2 variables, you tend to expect a higher price tag. So be mindful that this book is not cheap, and that it will cost money if you are interested in it. Now, whether I actually recommend this book, yes I do. I think that this is really a fantastic effort, and it really does flesh out a lot of the history of the Martini family of rifles. Now, there have been several efforts in the past detailing the history of the Martini-Henry rifles. At this point, they're several decades old for the most part, and may carry some dated research. So if you want some more up-to-date information, I would suggest this book. Now, a lot of these efforts kind of like either take the high-level approach, where they're kind of just taking a very surface view of it, or they tend to the more technical side, where it's reams and reams of tables and dates and production numbers, serial number ranges, and all that stuff. Either effort is fine. What I think is the strength of this particular book is it manages to straddle that fine line in between both of them, where you are getting that high-level view of the history, from its genesis to the end of its service, but you're also getting, the more detailed information that I think a lot of people crave. You'll find out about which plants produced rifles and when. You'll find out about, the battles over procurement by these respective plants, the, fights between government and, the various stakeholders. You'll find out about the struggles that the employees had, when their plants shut down due to a lack of contracts. All of that stuff is in there. So you're going to get a really fleshed out story of the Martini-Henry and all of the events that surrounded it. So would I recommend this book? Absolutely. I think that Neil Aspinshaw's scholarship in this was fantastic. You get all the information you could possibly want. If you own a Martini-Henry, I think it almost behooves you to pick up a copy of this book. And if you don't, I think it still makes for a pretty interesting read about, the history of a rifle that's so inextricably linked to the history of the British Empire. So, yes, a strong recommendation for the Martini-Henry rifle for Queen Anne Empire. I think it's a worthy addition to any library, and I would strongly urge you to pick it up. If you are, there is information in the description below of where you can order it, so feel free to check that out. I hope you enjoyed today's review. May all of your shots, particularly out of your Martini-Henry rifle, ring true, and take care. Bye-bye.